Yeah, we don't really want to go back there. But then there's you, so we came back. So we have a new room, I guess, kind of changed. Same donuts.
Same Muppets back here.
Same people are here early, been on time, and some were late, but we won't make fun when they walk in.
Yes, we will. We accept walk-ins here.
So let's pray, shall we? Lord, we gather this morning. We thank you. We pray that you will guide us in our thought. Pray that the Scripture would be illuminated to us and we might understand, and that you would be honored in all of it. We come and thank you in Christ's name.
Amen.
Amen. All right, we are back in the book of Ephesians. We're close. Come on in, brother.
Come on in.
Come on in. We're open to the late people. Come on in.
Dismiss the prayer.
So we're in Ephesians, and as you recall, Ephesians is talking about our position and then our condition. Talking about our position in Christ and then how we are to live that. So we're in the living, the functional, the practical. And as many have said about this book, let's see.
Your wand is right there.
We can. My what?
Hey, wand.
It doesn't work, he said.
Oh.
It says broken. So, some look at this book. Ruth Paxton would call it the wealth, the walk, and the warfare. Watchman Nee would say it's the sit, walk, and stand. And there are lots of other ways of doing it, but I think both are correct. We have kind of moved from the wealth of our position to the walk of the believer, and now Paul's going to bring us into what he would call the warfare. Why warfare? Well, because in the Christian life you have warfare, but you need to know these two before you get into the third. Right? You got to understand who you are and whose you are. You got to understand how I'm to live my life now, and the power to do that. Not the flesh, it's in the power of the Spirit. And then you're able to handle the warfare. Mm-hmm. And as you know, Paul is going to talk to us about this armor, right? The armor of God. There's lots of pictures of the armor, but we're not going to get to the armor today. We're going to get set up for it. But he's going to get us to the armor because we are in a war. We need to understand that as Christians, we are in a war of the worlds. The world we live in here. But Paul's going to suggest, he's actually going to say more than suggest, he's going to say, there's another world in operation. Yeah, we live down here. We're here. We're in this building. We're here. But there's another war that's taking place. So let's take a look at how that war manifests itself, if we can. So we're going to start in chapter 6. And Paul says in we're going to start in verse 10, where we kind of left off. He says, finally, so we know we're getting to the end of the book. Or at least the end of the section is really going to be the end of the book. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Why would we do that, Paul? Here's the reason. For our struggle, Paul, the Ephesians, and us today, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. The order is actually blood and flesh, but okay. Flesh and blood. But against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness that reside in the heavenly places. Is he talking about Ephesus? City? Well, the city of Ephesus was a bad city, and they had lots of magic. They had lots of, quote, supernatural manifestations. They had lots of evil worship. But I don't think that's exactly what he's talking about. I think Paul has a little bit of a bigger picture. So let's kind of retrace our steps here. He says, I want you to be strengthened in might and his strength. Notice Paul uses 3 words here, right? Here in your notes. Strengthen, that's the dunamis. We get the English word dynamite from that, the power. With might, often used as a supernatural power, especially in Ephesians 1:19 and the parallel in Colossians 1. It's God's power. Well, here Paul's saying there is this power we need to be strengthened with, and then he gives us our third word for strength. So Paul is trying to help us understand that we need to understand that God is the one who grants the power, the strength. It's his might by which we're going to be able to wage war. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, verse 11, put on the full armor of God. So Paul is using a word picture for us, right? It's armor. Well, in the early first century, they had military, and they all wore armor. We're familiar with people, or police, or military, who they wear body armor. They may have knee pads, they may have elbow pads. We've seen a lot of this in Hong Kong, in the news, right? The riot police are out. They've got the shield, they've got the guns, they've got a variety of weaponry. They've got the body armor, they've got all kinds of stuff, not to mention the helmet. Paul's going to talk about all of that. Why? Because the ancient Roman soldier had all of that. Right down from the kinds of shoes that he wore, the feet, to the sword, to the shield, to the helmet, and to the centerpiece that would gird all that together. So Paul's going to tell us about that. But at this point, he says, listen, here's what I want you to do. Command, put on the full armor of God. Now, why would I need that? That you may be able to stand. Not attack, not go forward, not go backward, but stand firm. Stand firm. Soldiers have to stand firm, right? Now, I, every once in a while, like to watch the octagon. A little cage fight. Anybody watch a little cage fight? Come on. Buddy does.
Not at my house.
Oh! Yeah, she sleeps well with Buddy's up
Buddy's
Now, cage fighting, or wrestling, let's tame it, or boxing, you have to be able to stand firm, right? You have to make sure your foundation isn't shaky, is not moving around. Otherwise, you'll slip, you'll fall, you'll get knocked off your feet. You have to have a firm foundation. You have to stand firm. So Paul is using this metaphorically to say, hey, listen, we're in a war. You're going to get to that in a minute. But the first thing is put on the armor so that you can stand firm and focus. Right.
Is this analogous to resist the devil and he'll flee?
Is this now resistance?
Analogous to the same thing as he's trying to say, don't fight the devil, but resist him by putting on the armor.
Yeah, he's going to get to that. Yeah. So Paul's introducing us to the fact that we're in a war. And at the beginning of this war, you got to put on this armor so that you're at least able to stand firm. But against what? Well, Paul tells us the schemes of the devil. Schemes. Now, there is a word that we get schematic from. That's not this word. This is the word we get method, methodology. I'm giving you the word there in your notes, methodia. Sounds like method, sounds like methodology. Exactly. Paul is aware that the scheme, the method that the devil has is effective. And he wants us to stand against it.
This translation uses the word wiles.
The wiles of the devil? Well, I guess whatever wiles means, if it means methods or if it means strategy, we'll go with that. I think wiles could be an idea of the strategy. And that would be analogous to this. Also, you've got to be aware of this. The devil has a plan, a plot, a strategy, a methodology that he uses. And they're not always the same.
Could I tell you a funny story about that?
Yes.
When my children were growing up, we would always read the Bible at breakfast, and we would take turns, and it was about our 9-year-old son's time to read that day, and we were reading in Ephesians 6, and he came across and put on the whole armor of God that you may stand against the willies of the devil. So our family has always talked about, be careful of the willies of the devil.
Especially Uncle Willie. Uncle Willie.
Is there more than one word for devil in the Bible, or is it just diablo?
Well, there's a word called diabolos. There's a word called Satan, the Satan. There's a word called the lawless one. There's a word called the evil one, back to the word porneia. So there are a variety of words, and they seem to be referring to the same personage.
It's always the same. Maybe.
Yes, but next week I'm going to maybe go back on that a smidge.
Okay. Thanks.
So Paul seems to believe that there's a devil. Paul seems to believe there's a personage it's an entity that has the capacity to think and to plan. Now, we live in a world where lots of people don't think there's a devil, right? And you know what the devil likes about that? You don't think he's there, you're not going to worry about him or think about it. He's clever like that. He doesn't have to be famous. He's fine with being not believed. Because not believing in him does the same thing. It makes you unaware. So,
have you ever heard that's his greatest deception?
Well, it may be his greatest deception in the West, because here he doesn't exist. That's an understatement of reality. But there's an overstatement of reality as well. The devil may be doing, oh, he's under the rock. Oh, he's here. He's there. He's everywhere, right? There are demons in the room, blah, blah, blah. And we overstate the ability and the person of the devil and the demons. But in America, I don't think that's so much the danger. I think the danger more is we understate he doesn't even exist. That's probably a little more in the world we live in. Right? But if you're in the third world, if you're in a lot of other places in the world, so sometimes the devil goes undetected, and sometimes he goes unsuspected. Either works for him. Either are part of the scheme that he perhaps uses in the world we live in. Now, Paul says, put on the full armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. I take it most of us here believe in a real devil. Right? Literal, not metaphorical. If you believe that, there are many people in our country that think that you should be locked up for mental illness. Right? Absolutely. Believing in a literal devil, pitchfork, horns, red, all that kind of stuff. Believing in a person of the devil can get you locked up. And I would not doubt that somewhere in the future, there will be in the public school system a way to get your grandson who reads the Bible and talks about the willies of the devil, when they hear him talk about, you believe in a devil? They will want him to have special care. They will want him to be in a special program to debrief him from this cultic mentality.
Exercise.
It's not yet. I'm not a prophet, not a son of a prophet, but I can see that day coming. I can see Child Protective Services coming and trying to rescue children from her because of what she's indoctrinating them. And you, right?
She's not scary.
Okay. I would not doubt that that's going to happen. The laws are getting, the laws are, some laws are on the books, more laws are going to be on the books, and this is even more exacerbated if you live in California.
I've got an example of that right now, that we had the missionaries who were in Paris, France, Michigan, and they sent their children to public school, and the children told in public school they had to do chores, like take out the trash, things like that. They came after them, they had to come home.
Because they were abusing the
And
child.
that was a decade ago.
Yeah. Child abuse. But now we're talking spiritual abuse.
But if you're a man and think you're a woman, you're not crazy.
You're liberated.
Yeah.
Liberated.
Child Protective Services is a group I'm very, very familiar with. And one of the things that they do in Texas as well as other states, is they run the foster care system, and Child Protective Services in the last decade and a half has been pushing these foster kids into these homosexual households. And that is I wrote a series on the Dallas Examiner about this, and one of the things that we discovered is there are essentially these groups of homosexual communities that would take these kids, and unfortunately, many of them are having sex with these kids. And you really, really have to dig to uncover that, or a kid escapes or something, or the kid dies. And that's the only way you find out about it.
This is the scheme of the devil, right? The devil utilizes human hands. He uses human minds. In fact, in the Old Testament, there's two passages that people argue about, and we'll argue a little bit. Turn back to Isaiah chapter 14. Because it's possible that here we have a picture of not just a man, not just a leader of Babylon or a leader of Tyre, but not just that human person, but something, someone, some power, some force behind him. So Isaiah 14. Isaiah is the prophet of God. He's railing against Babylon, starting off in the beginning of the chapter. Chapter 13 as well as then in 14. But in chapter 14, verse 12, listen how he describes this human king. Verse 12, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning. Remember, Jesus is called morning star. This is star of the morning. In the ancient Middle East, the stars were thought to be deities, divinities. And they had a whole pantheon of this. How you have fallen from the heavens, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth. You have been weakened, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. And I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Nevertheless, ye shall be thrust down to Sheol, to the recesses of the pit. Now, I don't know, but that does not sound like a description of the king of Babylon. It does not sound like a description of simply a localized, regionalized king. It sounds like something else. It sounds like it could be referring to some sort of angelic entity. Now, Old Testament scholars argue over this, and I'm not an Old Testament scholar. I've read a little bit on it, but it seems like that's possible.
Fred, if we take some of these as not just symbolic,
Right?
do we then proceed with descriptions of places as not just symbolic? Sheol and a variety of other elements, how do you view that?
Well, I think when he talks about Sheol, there's a literal place. I think when he talks about a place in the assembly, I think that's a real place. Remember when Job, how that thing in Job starts? Satan is where?
Taking a walk.
He's taking a walk, and then he goes where? He goes up to a meeting,
Yeah.
right, with the sons of God, whoever they are. We might have to look at that in a little while. So I think there are places that are not in this, let's say what it's not. It's not here. It's not Texas, it's not Earth, it's not on this territory, it is somewhere else. And if you add a dimensional aspect to that, that makes it even all the more. So yeah, I think there's a little reality to this.
So that would be in the second or third heaven?
Second or third heaven would definitely be an additional dimension that we are not normally part of.
Right.
Yeah, we're Paul went. So it seems to me that Isaiah is, clearly he's got a message of doom to the king of Babylon, but maybe there's something, someone, who this king represents on earth, and it sure ain't Jesus. It seems to be a very negative. Now, look over at the other place, you find it in Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 28, and the way you remember these is 14 and 28, right? Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28. Right. So you go over to chapter 28, and here Ezekiel is talking against the king of Tyre, a literal, real human being. But does this sound like a literal, real human being? Look at verse 11. You know, this could be all very poetic. Is it a very poetic way of talking about him, or is it something more? Verse 11, again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, king of Tyre, thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, jasper, the lazuli, and the turquoise, and the emerald, and the gold, and the workmanship of the settings and sockets was in you on the day that you were created. They were prepared. You were the anointed cherub. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created. You were blameless? You sound like a man? You sound like the king of Tyre? You were blameless in your ways from the days you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. Therefore, I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God. Remember the assemblies in Ezekiel, in Isaiah, here we're talking about the mountain of God. And I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings, that they may see you. By the multitude of your iniquities and the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore I have brought fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you, and I have turned you to the ashes of the earth in the eyes of all who see you. And all who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have become terrified, and you will be no more. Now, I think some of that could be a picture of the king of Tyre. I think some of that could even be poetic license about a human king of Tyre. But I think some of this has nothing to do with the king of Tyre. It has to do with an anointed cherub that God created, that was with God on the holy mountain, who evidently had authority on the holy mountain. And then in pride was lifted up. In Isaiah's passage, it said, I will be like God. He was lifted up in pride, and God cast him out, cast him down. Now, either a man, it's a story that doesn't have anything to do with reality, or it's the Old Testament's way of talking about the fact that when there is a wicked, evil king, there is a power behind them. Now, we don't want to be too quick to rush to analogy and judgment on America. We probably wouldn't say that George Washington had this problem. But there are some presidents that I would have no problem saying, or kings, or chancellors, or whatever. I have no problem saying there was demonic influence. Do you really think Hitler did everything on his own? Do you really think he could be that successful that fast and mesmerize the most educated people in the world? From a Christian background and a scientific background, you really think that he could mesmerize them that fast? Slaughter millions and millions? Nah, it was demonic. No doubt in my mind.
Okay, the German people were historically Huns and Goths. They were absolute nomadic, uncivilized, and then they became Christianized, And that's what led to the modern Germany. It was only after Christianization that they actually became successful.
And they were very smart. They are very smart. They're very scientific, right? The Enlightenment took over and it was very beneficial, it was blended with the Renaissance. But then pride took over and then this little man shows up and I have no doubt he was demonically influenced. So I can't prove that. You can't go back and exhume and pull out DNA that shows demonic forces and stuff. But this seems to be, this seems to be part of the demonic schemes or methods of the devil. He uses people. He harms people. So,
2 Corinthians 4:3-4 says he's the God of this world.
and he blinds the eyes of the unbelieving. Right? You wonder why your friends can't hear the gospel when you talk to them. They look at you and go, "You're crazy. What's wrong with you?" They're demonically blinded. The God of this world has blinded the eyes of the unbelieving so that they cannot hear the gospel. Which is why we need to pray for them, because they can't see, they can't hear. They're deaf and blind. So it seems to me, if you go back to Ephesians, we're dealing with this supernatural being Paul is talking about. Old Testament, we have a little bit of an example of him through Isaiah and Ezekiel, if you take that as being representative of the anointed cherub, the Satan, the diabolos, the slanderer, the deceiver. That's what he does. He's a lie. He's the father of lies. That's what he does. He's the God of this world. John 12:31 says it as well as 2 Corinthians 4. This is a real person with a real mentality, a real skill, a methodology to mess with men. That's what he's been doing since, shall we say, the garden. That's how it's always been. So, Paul says you better put on the full armor of God, that you may be able to stand firm, not fall backwards, not get out of balance, stand firm against this devil. So on the bottom of page 1, I say the devil is clever and will attack frontal and from behind. He knows the weakness of man and perhaps each of our unique areas of moral weakness. So the question becomes, do you know your weak area, and are you standing against his schemes? Right? Or, put it this way, do you know your children's weak spots and your grandchildren's weak spots? And are you praying for them and their weak spots? I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. One's married, one's single. And they're growing up, and they're successful and busy and doing all kinds of things. But you know what happens when you're busy and successful and enjoying this world? It's very easy to forget about the other world. So our prayer is, Lord, we want them to be successful, but not too. Help them have enough not to curse you, but not too much to forget you. That sounds like a Bible verse. Oh, that's in the Old Testament. Okay, well, that's good. And that's why we should study the Old Testament just a little bit. So why? What's going on? What's the matter? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's the way from the get-go we have crafted warfare that we spend a lot of time and money trying to figure out the weakness of our opponent
To exploit it.
to be able to attack there, and it trickles down into all aspects of our life, whether felonious or simply in business.
That's a lawyer word, by the way.
Whoa.
Where do you hear that outside of the law?
I use it every day.
Yeah, you do. Go ahead.
My wife uses it on me all the